Good morning, Rabotai. Welcome to Breakfast in the Class. Breakfast in the Class today are dedicated in loving memory of David Bar Mocha alav Shalom Leilun Nishmat David Ben Saada, from his wife Sylvia, children Yigal, Asher, Roni, Yossi, Nir, and Shiran and family. Breakfast in the Class are also dedicated in loving memory and Leilun Nishmat Yosef Moshe Ben Rabbi Meir alav Shalom, sponsored by his son Raphael Dagan. Finally, Breakfast in the Class today is also Leilun Nishmat on his yahrzeit, Yisrael Ben Sima Fega Rausman, who is my wife's grandfather, on behalf of the entire Rausman and Abixer families. Week of Cold Brews today, sponsored by Emmanuel Zara in honor of David E. Ash, for sponsoring Cold Brew regularly and for all the chesed he does in his substantial capacity to do good. My friends, in our parasha, we read about something that seems to be very interesting. There are two types of adversaries that Yaakov Avinu faces. Yaakov Avinu faces an adversary called Lavan, where everything is hidden, where everything seems to be pretending to be white, and pretending to be pure, and pretending to be innocent, but is actually out to get him. And then he has another adversary, and the adversary is called Esav. Esav is literally in every possible way coming out towards him with 400 men ready for war. That's the type of people that Yaakov Avinu has to deal with. The sly and the cunning, the person who's kind of going to stab you with the small knife, I don't know if you guys remember the Saturday night special, right? They had those little tiny guns that the guy would sneak in, and when they would kill someone in the mafia stories, or the guy that comes with a machine gun right up to your face and tells you that they are your enemy. So Yaakov Avinu faces both of these challenges in his life, the hidden challenges and as well the revealed challenges. And it's interesting that from the revealed challenges, Yaakov Avinu doesn't get hurt. In his story with Esav, he has to prepare himself for war, but nothing actually happens to him from that the open meeting between him and Esav. Whereas with Lavan, Echlifet Maskurti Aseret Monim, 10 times, he messed with Yaakov Avinu, drove him crazy. He set him back many, many years in his process of building a family, being able to go back to Eretz Yisrael. And we see oftentimes that is the worst or the more difficult of challenges. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is because I think there's something interesting here on this specific day. Today is Veterans Day, and Veterans Day is a day that was initially actually set aside as a day to celebrate and a day to remember all the soldiers that died in World War I. Unfortunately, it's really sad to think, if you read about when they originally set it up, the idea was that this was going to be a war, this was going to be the war to end all wars. And khalas, that's it. After this war, we don't have any more wars. How short is it before we find ourselves in the Second World War? How many wars have we had in America since then, both domestic and abroad? But at the same time, Veterans Day was set up to be able to celebrate the sacrifices that the American military members made, in that great war. And later on in 1954, they actually changed it to include the soldiers from all different wars across, for the contribution of soldiers across all the different wars. And, one of the things that I'm thinking about is that, it struck me because I noticed that there's a differentiation in the American calendar between holidays. Some holidays are called major holidays, and some holidays are called minor holidays. And I was thinking, what must it feel like to the family of someone who served and died abroad in the line of duty, to hear that the day that commemorates his service is called a minor holiday. I would think that there's something else you could call it. Like, just as an example, you go on a plane, you have first class, you have business class, you have economy class. Could you imagine the airline trying to sell you for $2,000 a ticket called second class? Or even worse, trying to tell people, please, if anyone in third class could please, if the people in third class could please be quiet and wait until the people in first, there's other words to call it besides calling it a minor holiday. And I get the logic behind it.
They're canceling the flights anyway, it doesn't matter.
They can't, sorry?
They're canceling all their flights.
They're canceling the flights anyway, because everyone should go on Sammy's jet set, what is it, at the jet set only, .com. Okay, now, my friends, there's something very special about this, and this is really what I want to talk about. I want to talk about the silent enemies and the loud enemies that people face in their life. And I think perhaps one of the silent enemies, one of the lavans that we face in our life, one of the biggest challenges that the Yetzer Hara sets up for us. I mean, we're all aware of the general Yitzrei Hara that a person has to deal with. You know, your ta'avot, your desires, you know, those paths, they're paved with lights. Like, you know exactly what the Yetzer Hara is trying to do to you most of the time. But one of the silent killers is the ability that a person has to overlook or to not pay attention to things that they are obligated to have hakarat hatov for. That's a silent killer of Judaism. It's a silent killer of spirituality. It's not the Esav Yetzer Hara that comes and knocks on your door in the form of a seductress, in the form of money sitting on the table gleaming. It doesn't come that way. It appears perhaps in a much more subtle way. But the underpinnings of all of Yahadut are dependent on whether or not you consider a day like Veterans Day to be a major holiday or a minor one. You know, I want to give a couple of examples of this concept. Baruch atah Adonai melech haolam she'akol nהיה baro. The pasuk tells us kabed avicha ve'et imecha, and it associates the honor of God with honoring of your parents. Now the question is asked, what are those two things to do with one another? Why does it say Ani Hashem in the pasuk related to your honoring and having fear of your father and mother? Why is kabet avicha ve'et imecha on the side of the luchot, which are all about mitzvot between man and God? Those should be between man and man. And now Chachamim explain that a person who doesn't have respect for their parents will not have respect for God. Why? The immediate example of your creator, in inverted commas, is your parents. If you don't have respect for them, if you can't speak to them with respect in your mind, in your heart, and in your mouth, if you can't address them properly, if you think that you could speak to them and call them by their first name, contradict what they say, tell them they don't know what they're talking about, if that's how you relate to your parents, how is a person going to be able to relate to Borei Olam, who is also his creator, on a much higher level, but also in a much more distant way? Your parents, your relationship with them is a natural and obvious one. The fact that God made you and that God gives you your blessings in life is something which might be a little bit more in the background. What happens if you can't respect the obvious responsibilities, respecting your parents? There's no way you're ever going to be able to respect God. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu tied the honor of His own name to the way that a person honors their parents. In fact, my friends, this is so interesting. We are called as Jews, we're called Yehudim. And the reason why we're called Yehudim is based on what we read in this week's parasha, that Leah called her son Yehuda. Now, why Yehuda? Of all the tribes, there's 12 tribes. We come from all the tribes. Why we all choose the name of Yehudim? And the Sfarim tell us because it is a core value of the Jewish people. A core value like no other value is the fact that a Jew must, obligated to constantly be in a state of hakarat hatov. Now this idea of modim anachnu lach, of Yehuda, this concept of saying praise, of praising HaKadosh Baruch Hu, of being thankful, it requires another element as well. And this is, I think, the reason why we have an aversion to being grateful, to showing gratitude and showing appreciation. The same word in Hebrew, modeh, which teaches that you are showing gratitude, you're thanking. The same word modeh also means admitting. Umodeh ve'ozev yirucham. In every gratitude is an admission that you could not have done something without another person. It's not easy to admit that you need someone. Everyone wants to feel independent. We want to feel like we run our own lives. We don't want to believe that we need somebody else. It makes us feel powerless, impotent, that we have to rely on another person to be able to accomplish something. So the admission, how much I owe my parents, is a direct link to how little I could have done without them. I want to claim all my own successes. for myself, if I have to admit that they raised me right, that they sent me to good schools, they made good decisions, even decisions I disagreed with when I was younger, okay? That admission is in an essence the element which leads a person to gratitude. So this concept that we have the freedoms in this country to be able to act and to live as we wish, and even more so to be able to practice Judaism and to be Jews in this country must resonate with every single Jew today, that we have an absolute duty of care to respect this day and to show honor to the soldiers that fought for it. You know, my friends, there's something which I think takes us to the next stage as well. One of the ceremonies that they have on Veterans Day as well is that they show a certain element of dignity and honor to the tomb of the unknown soldier. And this soldier, which they don't know who he was, but it was called the tomb of the unknown soldier in Washington. And what do they do? What do they do with this soldier? They show they bring a flag and they do everything they need to do. This also resonates to a large degree with a feeling of tremendous hakarat hatov that we have to people we don't even know. And let me explain what I mean. You know your father, your mother, you know what they did. You know your uncle, your aunt, you know your grandpa, you know what they did. This hakarat hatov. I have tremendous hakarat hatov. I mentioned my wife's grandfather. I have tremendous hakarat hatov to him. You know, he was the one that set us up to be able to study. He helped us while we were studying in Israel to become a rabbi. You know, you think the person that helps you while you're studying, a person who sponsors those 2, 3, 4 years that a rabbi has to take in Israel to study, if someone takes that responsibility, it's not a tremendous amount of money. You know, you could sponsor a rabbi today, you know, for what is it, him and his wife and maybe a baby, what is it, $36,000, a couple $1,000 a month, $2,000, $3,000 a month, for $36,000 a year as an example, you pay that for 3 years, you made this person a rabbi. Every person he then teaches, that's your zechut, forever. You think about the person giving classes for the rest of his life because he became a rabbi with semicha. So you understand, this is something that he did for us, and he allowed us to be able to do that. So every single day, even though today is his yahrzeit, we mentioned his name, every single day there's a responsibility to think, to remember the veterans, all the people that came before us, that laid the pipework for us to be able to do the jobs that we do. And oftentimes it's the unknown soldiers that we have the greatest amount to be thankful for. You know, you were raised by your parents, no doubt. But you went to a school. Who started that school? You know how hard it is to open up a school? Everyone loves to complain about Jewish schools. How expensive they are, how underwhelmed they are with this part of the school, with the education. They don't like this, they don't like that. Everyone loves to complain. You know how hard it is to open a school? People love to complain. The mikveh, it's not so nice. The other mikveh is much nicer. You know how hard it is to raise the money to build a mikveh? And I heard once someone complaining about a mikveh in Manhattan. Chabad has a beautiful mikveh on 77th. Beautiful mikveh, right? It's like, they built it like a spa. That's how it should be. So a person should feel it. But what happens if there's a mikveh in town? It's been a mikveh for decades. It's not so nice. It's not updated. We're complaining about the mikveh. You know how expensive it is to open a mikveh in Manhattan? You know how expensive that real estate is? You have to dig the bore, you have to make sure that it's coming from the sky, all the rainwater, collect the rainwater. What are you going to do? Have a rooftop mikveh? Most of the time the mikveh is in the basement. Go figure out now how to get the water down from the ceiling to the basement without piping it with pressure, etc., to ruin the fact that it's water. There's a lot that goes into that, okay? But we don't think, and we don't notice, and therefore we don't show gratitude. And I want to share with you one element of something that I did not notice, I did not show gratitude for. I was just because I was not aware. When I first met my wife's grandfather, Lava Shalom, I noticed he was a businessman, tremendous Yireh Shamayim, built a big family, was a big Baal Tzedakah in Monsey, in New Square, right? And I noticed that his one of his hands was like tilted. So I just thought that maybe he'd had an injury. I wasn't going to bring it up. I just noticed that it was tilted backwards. I didn't say anything. Anyway, I knew him. I had the chance, the privilege, the honor to know him for a few years after I got married, before he passed away. And after he passed away, I managed to get my hands on a CD of him telling the story of how he escaped from the Holocaust. And on the CD, he starts saying a story about how when he was in Auschwitz, he was there as a young boy. When he was in Auschwitz, he goes to his brother and he says to him, today, he says, tomorrow is Yom Kippur. I'm not working on Yom Kippur. His brother says, but they'll kill you. He says, I don't care. I'm not working on Yom Kippur. I'm going to find a way to get out of it, to not have to do the work tomorrow. The brother says, look, it's sakanat nefashot. You don't have to do that. Why are you doing it? He was very strong. His yirat shamayim was very strong. That's it. I'm not doing it. He was working at the time in the coal mines in the outskirts of the camp in Auschwitz-Birkenau. And he goes down into the coal mines and he finally comes up with a solution. You know, in the coal mine down there, they were mining for the coal, and then they had these like tracks that would bring down these big train carts, and they would fill the carts with coal, and then the trains would kind of come up, but they would come down into the pit, and then they would kind of go back up. Anyway, he closes his eyes, he bites down with one hand. As the train car comes down, he sticks his hand in between the two trains. The train crushes his hand in between the two train cars. He runs upstairs, says to the guard, he says, sir, unfortunately I just got my hand caught between the train. It broke all the bones in his wrist. He went to the infirmary and he managed to not work on Yom Kippur. And I was watching this video after he passed away with tears in my eyes, because it was something that I'd seen with my own eyes all those years. And I never knew why or how that came. I was embarrassed to ask him. I didn't want to point out maybe something that was, he wasn't happy about. But it was only afterwards that I realized what an idiot I was, that I didn't have a chance to be able to appreciate, to tell him how proud I was that my children, that's where my children come from. You understand something like that? That is the honor we're showing to the unknown soldiers. You think about the idea that the Syrian community here, we have a beautiful, flourishing community. And I think a lot of times everyone says, oh wow, the rabbi did this, the rabbis, they set up this, they did that. But there are random people that were here in America that were working so hard when the Syrian community was a bunch of immigrants on the other side of the ocean. How'd they get here? There's groups of people that worked very hard, tirelessly. Many of them not Syrian, rather, because the Syrians weren't here. There's a woman from Toronto called Judy Feld Carr. She was responsible for bringing over a tremendous amount of the original Syrian group that came here. People, you know who she is? You see my point? There's so many different people that a person has an obligation to show the hakarat hatov to. Now, all the mitzvot are rooted in this, because as the Sefer HaChinuch writes, if you have true gratitude to Borei Olam, when it comes time to do a avon, what are you going to say? How could I do this avera? How could I not do this mitzvah? HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives me everything. So the root of all mitzvot is in the hakara, and the recognition of how much God gives you, how much you owe Hashem. So if you don't have hakarat hatov, you have nothing. And that's why the very first tefillah that we say is Modeh Ani. Sfarim say that actually the correct usage would be Ani Modeh, which means I am grateful. But instead we switch it to say Modeh Ani. And the rabbis write the reason for that is so that the first word out of a Jew's mouth in the morning should not be Ani, I, me. The first word should be Modeh, I am grateful. The word that you begin think about that as a Jew. Your opening line every day of your life, from the time that you become a sentient child till the day that you die, the first word that you say is thank you. What a magnificent concept. But the idea that gratitude is a self-contained mitzvah is the biggest mistake that a person could make. You become a more grateful person, automatically you become a more spiritual person. Yaakov Avinu has two enemies. Esav, which is represented by the war with the angel, which represents the Yetzer Hara. The Yetzer Hara comes beating his chest with 400 soldiers behind him. That's one kind of a war. But then there's another kind of a war, and that kind of a war is the war that attacks and presents and it's quiet, you don't notice. Not noticing, my friends, is one of the greatest problems that a Jew could have in his life. So if you made a list for yourself of all the people that help you each and every day, whether this starts with your doorman, or the security guard here in the Beit HaKnesset, or your secretary at work, or the person who's the elevator man, it doesn't matter. Even if they're doing something very small, the moment a person starts opening their eyes, I have to tell you, they're living a completely different life. Both in terms of the spirituality of the Ruchaniyut, but also, my friends, in terms of understanding the real world that they live in. A person who's not grateful lives in a miserable world. The only thing they notice is pain. A person who is grateful notices everything. They see that every day people are out trying to help me, trying to do good. They're living in different worlds. So Rabotai, Gal enai, like the pasuk says, open up my eyes, ve'abita, and I will see wondrous things, b'toratecha, in your Torah. And I translated the pasuk, not Gal enai ve'abita, open up my eyes so I should be able to learn chidushe Torah, but rather, you know how I notice the wonders of Torah, of mitzvot? Gal enai, just by opening up my eyes. Noticing people, noticing what my parents did. Call your parents. Recall something from your childhood that they did for you that was very important. Call a teacher from your childhood that made a real impression on you, that gave you confidence. A mentor that helped you in the beginning when you were starting out in business. Thank them for it. The gift is not the gift of thanks for them. The greatest recipient of that knowledge, of that recognition of gratitude is in your own life. You start to feel lucky to be alive. You start to feel happy in your day-to-day. And that, my friends, is the secret killer, the representation of the war that Yaakov fights with Lavan. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen.